Hello and welcome to
Fascinating Nod,
Fantastically Queer, a podcast by
JK.
and Darren.
Before we go into this episode, we are meeting the wonderful Stella Marbles. We're in Islington.
Yeah, the beautiful Stella Marbles, who's a really amazing drag artist, really creative, amazing. She's massively talented, really, really smart. Going to be a really incredible episode, I think.
But before we get into it, I just wanted to talk a bit, because we've seen on social media this week that people are using the phrase LGBT with a slash between the B and the T. If you're doing that, please stop. This is a bit of an education. You need to not separate the trans from the LGBT acronym. They are a vital part of our community, and we're not equal until the fight for all equality is done. So if you are posting about LGBT plus community, do not put a slash in that acronym.
Yeah, let's not separate the T from the rest of the community, because, I mean, society does that enough already for us, so let's try and stop that, yeah. Or the other thing that was happening a lot this week was the pride flag with the glitch where it had the cross sign going through it as well, which is another thing. Like, if you see people doing that, please report it, because actually that's homophobic and transphobic and just anti-LGBT, which isn't cool or nice.
So we have a responsibility to all act for the wider community and to look after our friends, colleagues, family, and so if you see either of those things, call people out on it, make sure that they're aware, educate them. You have a duty to do that. I just wanted to do this because actually, we have a bit of a platform here. But let's not dwell on this too much.
And actually get into the conversation with the amazing Stella Marbles.
Hope you enjoy. The first question normally is, why here?
Oh, why here? Okay, that's a good question. This is my house, and I've lived here since September, and I moved here because I started doing drag in March of last year, but I was still at Exeter University at the time, so I got into it there, and then I came back to London for a month in April while I was doing my dissertation, because there was no point in me staying in Exeter, and I wanted to start getting into the London scene, and I wanted to see what it was all about. So I did that, went back to Exeter again in May to finish up, and then after that came back to London. But I was living with my parents, and I was going back and forth between the two, and it got to the point where I never expected I'd be successful in drag, or that it would get to the point where I'd actually start working in it. I just did it for fun, but then I was going out almost 3 nights a week, which my parents live in Watford, so commuting from Watford and the trains were just a bitch. And also I wanted to be in London. I wanted to be able to connect with people all the time. And then I found this place totally by chance. I was looking for a house, and Petite LeMay, my housemate, we kind of knew each other because we'd done some gigs together, and just through the scene I knew their name, and they posted that this room was available, and it was cheap and in a great location. I was like, yes, can I please live here? And also just because I love everyone here is creative and queer. Obviously Petite does drag, my housemate Jack runs a queer magazine. He's a photographer. He also does drag. He has this you'll see in a little, he's this crazy archived kind of vintage collection. My housemate Sophia is a hairstylist. So it's madness, but we all fit together so well, and that's what I wanted, was to just be immersed in this creative environment.
Exeter, much of a drag scene?
It definitely has more of a scene than you'd expect. When I started doing drag and I realized that there were some drag queens in Exeter, it reminded me of this one interview I saw of Sharon Needles, where she said, you can go to the smallest town in the back hills of any part of the world and there will be someone there doing drag. So I'd say there are probably about 10 queens in Exeter. There's Verena Fox, Lolly Swallows, and a bunch of who I'm really close friends with. And yeah, and I thought I'd have, especially because it's a smaller town, I thought I'd have a harder time getting people to accept me or just kind of be interested in what I did, but they were the complete opposite. I just got on so well with everyone, and I still keep in contact with them, and I still go back to visit them every once in a while. And I performed there a few months ago, which was really fun to go back and actually perform as someone quote unquote established after being a baby when I started there. Yeah.
And one of the other places you mentioned when we were talking about locations was Camden and Upstairs. Why was that relevant to you?
That was really relevant because when I was talking about in April when I came back to London, one of the first kind of people I met was Crayola, who's a drag queen now that has done so well, and I met her at what are they called?
Not another drag competition? Not that?
I ended up going to that with her, but I met her at just one of the big Club Kids events.
Right.
And then she said, why don't you come to Not Another Drag competition? I'm doing it. And so from that point on, every week I would be going to see her all through that month of April, going out to see her perform at Not Another Drag competition. And before that, I'd only been to like Club Kids events and usually not in drag or just like in something fun, but not in full drag. Whereas Her Upstairs was the first time I started dressing up in the full drama and actually meeting London queens and getting to like interact with them and make friends and network. And that was kind of like my introduction that then led to so many, and that's how she became my kind of drag mother. And that's where she was like, saw what I was doing and saw that with the work I was producing and was like, you can actually do something with this, which I'd never thought I could. So that's kind of where Stella started to like experiment and grow. And it was great because Her Upstairs, it's a shame it's gone because it was such a community and welcoming space that I felt safe in to kind of step out. Because every time then when I came out in drag, like, even though you would think it's easier because I identify as a woman to like come out in female outfits, for me it was so nerve-wracking because I knew every eye would be on me in the room, like, what's that girl doing wearing this? And obviously it wasn't that I didn't know there were female identifying or femme queens. Like, I knew about Victoria Sin, TT Bang, Georgie B. Like, I knew they were out there, but that still didn't change kind of the nerves that I think anyone gets when they're getting into drag.
And so, for the purpose of this, who is Stella? Like, what is that concept? How does Stella look? What's Stella all about?
So when I first got into it, I didn't have any reference in terms of, I was inspired by queens I'd seen on Drag Race and kind of the more mainstream drag references. And so I was just playing around with kind of more elaborate outfits and trying to figure out, like, I didn't want to just do it for the visuals. Once I realized that it was something I really wanted to do, I was like, what's the purpose of this? Because when I started watching Drag Race and I then started hearing about, female queens and AFAB drag, I was so amazed because for me, drag and why it's so empowering because it allows you to step outside of your identity and become something more, whether that's becoming more female or more masculine or just becoming something else, othering yourself from gender. And that's where I really started to find Stellas, when I learned more about Club Kids and just drag that tries to distance itself from gender. And that's why I found masks so interesting, and that's why now masks are kind of the central part of who Stella is. Like, I always wear a mask and I make most of my own masks because I like the fact that I love the references you can make in fashion with them, but I also like the fact that it turns you into something else, and it also separates me from gender a little bit, because I'm not trying, I always wear like feminine silhouettes, but I'm not trying to be a woman. And I like the fact that it kind of takes femininity and it twists it and makes people either just question it or just look at the female body in a different way or kind of make fun of it. When people always said drag isn't much of a stretch for a woman, I always thought that was really funny, because I was like, well, even our beauty standards for women day to day are ridiculous. Like, the way a woman looks with makeup is considered not that much of a stretch, or in heels or wearing tights and a dress. I was like, if you look at me out of makeup in sweatpants and then look at me with 10 minutes of makeup on, you might not recognize me on the street, just because it's such a big difference, So yes, that's what drew me to it. But yeah, it's always just masks. Masks is what I love about drag, and what kind of now is like my niche, I guess.
It's very much like the Stella brand is a mask. Isn't
Yeah.
it? Like when people see you, they want to see, like, they almost kind of want to see you in a mask of some form, and they're like art installations to the mask, even your whole like outfit and everything. And I think obviously we spoke before, and you said like, for you, you're a drag artist, not a drag queen. You're a drag artist, like, and that's the way you like your body and your outfit, your clothes are like your canvas almost.
Yeah, definitely. And I always say like drag artist, drag creature, because I don't want it to be about being a man or woman. Like, obviously I identify as female, But when I go into drag, I like to step away from that. Even though I'm wearing feminine outfits, I like to step away from it. And I like the masks because they push me creatively. They always push me to be thinking of new ideas and thinking of, like, issues I can engage with or ideas that I can bring into it. Like, I often like to either, like, I directly play with gender. Like, the other day I wore a mask that said real on my forehead, on the forehead of the mask, and then it said male, a boy, and girl on the cheeks, but then I crossed them both out, and so that was a very kind of obvious, like, denouncement of gender. But then other times it's just something that makes my face look like something else, like an alien, or just kind of like removes an identity as well. Because I think that's the thing, is so many people use drag kind of to escape from their identity or to reimagine it. And I think that's like where I kind of find drag really, really powerful, because it's so easy to take gender or how someone looks and use it to establish everything you know about them. Whereas with me, you can't establish anything about me from my masks. And I kind of like that removal in a way, you know.
And does that mean you're almost hiding part of who the real Stella is? There's always something that people are constantly yearning for, something more.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a bit of, I'm showing, it's like, it's kind of on a flip side. On one hand, I'm showing so much of who I am because I'm putting this creative, extreme creative expression out into the world. I'm hiding my face, you know, which I like, because then when I do show my face, it's a conscious choice, you know, and it's choosing where and when. So it's like, it's giving me control, I think, as well, over like how people get to know me and to what extent they get to know me, which I think as well is something that often women don't always get the choice in, or kind of people try and like, and just in the real world nowadays with social media, people, everything about your personal lives is so on show to the extreme. So being able to like create a sense of privacy with it, but also being able to engage more openly with people at the same time, but having that filter, I think is powerful for me. But I think it also creates a lot of intrigue for people, which is why people like what I do, or I hope they like what I do, because they always want to see what I'm going to bring next, and to what extent am I going to, you know, kind of put myself forward or put this other visual forward.
Isn't like you create an ambiguity, like a purposeful ambiguity with you and your audience, which is very like, it's an interesting thing, but it's a very really like cool and creative and political stance you're making as well. Because like you said, the reasons why you're doing it, that it sounds like your drag is very like a political statement you're making. You're trying. There is very much a message behind everything you do.
Mm-hmm. And I think it even physically like, puts like, a lot on me, because when some masks I wear, like if I wore one that was like a visor, like a metallic visor that went over my whole face, and when I wear those, I can't talk to people as much. Like I can't engage with people because they can't, especially because I often and usually work and am in clubs, because that's kind of where I live my drag life. It's loud music, so it's hard to hear people anyway, and there I am with a full mask and people can't engage with me in the same way, so it's frustrating, but I kind of enjoy that frustration.
Who's just interrupted us?
That was Petite LeMay, my housemate, who is a amazing drag queen who does a lot of work with Sync the Pink. So yeah, you should I'll show you their Instagram, because they are fabulous. But yeah, all my housemates have a habit of just walking into my room, often with our cats in hand, and they just place them on my lap. Like, there you go. Yeah, but then it's kind of fun, because I can then, in kind of a selfish way, but if I don't feel like interacting with someone, or because the thing is, people don't realize just being out in drag, especially when you're hosting or and it is so draining, because you have to be on all the time and you have to be like interacting with everyone. But it's also so energizing. Like I love it, but I like that with the masks, sometimes I can use them to take a break, because people can't see my face, so then I can kind of pause, regain myself, and then jump back into it, you know, which not a lot of other drag queens or just drag artists don't have. You know, they have to kind of be on because you can see everything, whereas I kind of give myself a cop out that way. But it's, you know, everyone finds different ways of kind of not dealing with it, but kind of finding the energy and balancing how you feel in like that kind of atmosphere. It's always changing, and you just have to be like, you have to be on it, you know.
And so do you find yourself, because we spoke just before we started recording about whether you'd be known as Stella or whether you'd be known by your, what would be the best way to describe it, your birth name?
Yeah.
So do you find not Stella taking over, but you live more as Stella? even if you're not kind of presenting as Stella. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was something that I started to realize, especially around October of last month, and something I had to kind of step back and talk to myself about, was how much I was like immersing myself in Stella. Because once I got back into London after finishing in Exeter full time, which was in like June, it was just, I didn't do anything else. Like, drag was like my whole life. Like, when I wasn't in it, out doing it, I was home, like making looks, thinking of things. And I think it's why I was able to kind of jump into the scenes so quickly. But it meant that, yeah, like, I didn't have anything else. And on one hand, I really like it because in terms of my relationships with people, like, Stella for me is such a, she is a part of me, so I don't mind being referred to as Stella both in and out of drag. And also I love the name. Part of the reason I picked it was because when I was little, I always wished I was called Stella. So for me, it's nice to kind of, but she's like the part of me that's outgoing and over the top and, you know, creative and a show person. And so, yeah, even when I meet friends of mine, because now I'm so lucky that so many of the people who I've met through drag and who are also drag artists are now just really close friends of mine. You know, I live with them, I work with them. So I'm just comfortable with Stella because that's how they've always known me. It's only kind of some very close friends of mine who will also call me Maddie or Madison. And often they do it almost as a joke, you know, not as a joke, but like it's funny to them because it doesn't seem real. Like, Stella seems more real to them. And some jump back and forth. But most people I prefer, if you know me through that way, I prefer you to call me Stella just because it just makes sense for the context. But in regards to like finding the balance and in terms of identity between the two, around like Christmas time, I just realized that there was no Maddie in my life at all, other than like working my day job. I didn't leave any time to do anything else in my life. And kind of my identity is who I am as Maddie, like someone who likes to hike and rock climb and read books and go to museums and spend days watching TV. Like, I wasn't doing any of that. And I realized that my drag started to suffer as a result of it because I was never giving myself any breathing space to just think. Like, I wasn't having time to come up with new looks, or even if I did have the time, I was just so exhausted from the constant work that when I did have the time, nothing was coming to mind, you know, like I wasn't being able to like produce anything creative. And then it was only once I started doing that again, which was around like the past 2 months, that then all these ideas started coming again, and I started thinking about like doing my ball, which was coming up, and other creative concepts. Like, you have to have that break outside of drag, I think, to then be able to cycle stuff back into it. It has to be an exchange, it's hard to find, especially in somewhere like London where you're working all the time.
And it is important to have that space, whatever you're creating, to, you know, if you're writing, you have to leave something for a while.
Yeah.
If you're photographing, you leave it, and it then kind of stews, it mellows, and then you can kind of go back to it with a fresh pair of eyes. And I think that's probably the same. You have to step away from something, indulge in something else. And, you know, whenever I'm trying to create, it's always when I'm in the shower that I then, like, I'm in the shower and then I have to run out of the bathroom and be like, shit, let me write this down, because otherwise it just goes. So yeah, I totally understand that kind of whole ethos of having to perhaps step back from Stella.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's true with any creative kind of profession. You have to find the balance between the two and give yourself time to think. And yeah, like, some of my best ideas I've had for masks have been like on the tube or on the toilet, like, yeah, just in the weirdest places. And it's when you're thinking about nothing at all, you know.
Exactly. And where does Marbles come from?
Stella, I picked not only because I love the name, but also because it's the name of my dog, my family's pet Labrador. And I liked it because I can always go with the trope of, you know, my name's Stella, named after my pet Labrador, because we're both bitches. And Marbles, some people thought it was because of Jenna Marbles, which is not true. Not that I don't love Jenna Marbles, but that wasn't the reference. Just because my drag Marbles is, you know, eccentric and over the top and ridiculous, and I felt like that name kind of epitomized all those qualities of Stella. And my housemate Jack pointed out, which I didn't actually realize till I named myself, Stella Marbles. If you say it in a certain accent, sounds like stellar marbles, which is a pun for great balls. So I never thought of that, but, you know, that also, I guess, is incorporated in the name, which I like as well, because I like kind of playing on people's expectations of my gender. Like, whenever people ask me if I'm out, you know, are you a man or a woman, I just say doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, or it's none of your business anyway. And it shouldn't matter, you know. So yeah, that's That's Stella Marbles.
See, I always thought the marbles part came from like you'd lost your marbles.
I was
Yeah.
about
like-
to say the same thing, and I
Yeah.
didn't want
Yeah.
to be rude.
Oh no, that is it. That's definitely, it's like lost your marbles, like just because marbles obviously is like synonymous for just being like lost your marbles, insane, like ridiculous. So yeah, that's kind of the ethos of it.
On brand.
Yes, very on brand.
You spoke about your ball. What's that? What are you working on?
Oh yeah, so in April on my birthday, the 21st of April, I'm throwing a masquerade ball for charity for Kaleidoscope Trust, which Darren is a part of.
Not associated in any way with this podcast.
And yeah, I basically came up for the idea because since I got into the drag scene, and me and other artists would just be talking about like the types of events that are going on in London and what we kind of hope to see as drag artists, I realized that there was kind of this gap in like grand events for queer and drag artists, you know, where kind of like a life ball type thing where people can come and dress to the nines in whatever type of elegance drama they want, you know, and just kind of celebrate queerness and celebrate the queer artistry in London. And also kind of, I wanted to throw an event that would hark back to the drag balls of New York that obviously are where so much of modern drag and queer artistry like was kind of cultivated. So I wanted to do an event to celebrate that, and I thought, you know, there'd be no better kind of time than my birthday, because the only thing I would want from my friends would be to come to this event and celebrate with me and, you know, showcase their artistry and their work. And I would rather have people raise money for a good cause as well than give me gifts. And I wanted, you know, I think for me, so much of drag and being a queer artist, it is about helping the LGBT plus community and about giving back to each other and promoting good causes. Like for me, that's always been so important to what I do. So I thought, you know, best way to pair the event and to kind of make a statement with it is to do that, you know.
And have your friends bought tickets yet?
They have.
It's good.
Yeah, no, a lot of people have bought tickets, and there are plenty more to go as well. And yeah, it's all the proceeds are going to the trust, and then there's going to be a raffle, and it's going to be just a lot of good hosts and DJs. Some of the best like drag artists in London are going to be a part of it.
So where is it?
At the Looking Glass Cocktail Club in Shoreditch.
On the 21st of April.
21st of April. Yeah, so
I'm sure we'll link to tickets somewhere.
Yeah.
so it's going to be a lot of fun.
Okay, can I just run to the toilet really quick?
Yeah.
I love this. Is the first time that we've had a loo break halfway through.
And how do you and Darren know each other?
So I met Darren. Christ knows now. I can't remember when exactly. It was through Pride in London.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I knew of Darren, and then followed each other on Instagram. And this came about because I'm a creative. I want to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Darren also wanted to start a podcast, and I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. And so it's taken like 6 months to get to where we are now. But it's interesting because we are our social political attitudes are kind of on different ends of the spectrum. So there's like this kind of dynamic, there's this kind of disjointedness between how we approach subjects, which is great. I think it works really well.
I like that though. I guess it's good because you can have different opinions and bring different stuff to the table.
Exactly.
If you all agree with each other on everything, it doesn't always
Boring,
make
isn't it?
for the most interesting
Yeah,
conversations.
Yeah. And I think that's what I really like about this concept as well, is that it's actually just going to people and having a chat. It's not like pretentious. It's not always going into deep stuff. But if that naturally comes up, that's really, really nice, and it's authentic, and it's just, yeah. I'm enjoying doing it. It's a really interesting project, and I hope people like it.
Yeah. No, I love being able to talk to people like that's another thing that got me into drag was journalism. Because that's part of the reason I started watching Drag Race and I heard about the show from a friend, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting, watch the show. And then I started going to see like the shows of the Rue Girls, and then once I got into it, I started wanting to go see shows in London. And at the time I was a journalist for the National Student, and I'd mostly been doing kind of travel writing until then, but then I'd started moving more into doing interviews with just different people, artists, because I love hearing, like, I'm sure you guys can relate, I love hearing people's stories. And I find that it's so fascinating just to get background behind, especially artists, because there's so much background to what we do. And it can tell a lot just about them as people, but also social issues, etc. So I started interviewing girls from RuPaul's Drag Race, and then I partnered with Drag World and did a series of interviews with them. And that's how I started kind of going to shows and then getting into it, etc., etc. So yeah, it's funny how like I was by like interviewing artists and drag artists, that's how I then started to become one, was kind of that segue.
And you've spoken about Drag Race being kind of perhaps that inspiration that sparked your interest. How important is it for people to not just view Drag Race as drag? Because a lot of the criticisms that I hear is that obviously Drag Race is elevated and it's on TV and it's kind of that production quality. But actually that's just one type of drag, right?
Oh, yeah.
So how important is it that people actually go out and explore drag in their local area?
For me, I think it's so important. Like, I think Drag Race was my foray into drag, like most people, because it's on television, and I just really stumbled upon it. You know, I was, you know, always kind of identified as a queer person, was interested in it, but I was the type of person that would, you know, maybe go to a drag show once a year for a friend's birthday. I wasn't in the community. But I think it's so important to explore drag outside of Drag Race, because it's like, the analogy I always use is, scientists always say that with vision, the spectrum of vision across all species is like a car's front window. And humans can only see about a finger length of that. I think Drag Race is kind of a similar amount of the spectrum of drag. Like, it's great, and it's a completely valid, you know, area of drag, but it's a very small portion of it. And that's what amazed me when I stepped out of just watching the show and started going to shows, was not only are there, like, even just within cis men who do drag, there are so many varieties and forms and visuals that can take on. But then even cis men who do drag are a small portion of it. You have trans people, non-binary people, AFAB identifying individuals, and it's so rich and diverse, and that's where I fell in love with drag. And I think also for me, that's where I find drag more interesting. Not to devalue drag that's female impersonation, but for me, I'm most fascinated where it makes me completely question gender, you know, or it plays around with gender, and it's, you know, androgyny and genderfuck, and kind of defies expectations or takes what you expect and subverts them in really interesting ways. Like one queen or kind of drag creature that I love is Eileen Bothways, and they're an AFAB but trans male identifying drag performer, burlesque performer, and they'll do drag where it'll be very feminine-esque or makeup, but then they'll have a beard made out of crystals, you know, and they'll do drag performances where they're wearing a dress, and then another one where they'll take it off and show that they're a trans male performer. And so they're constantly playing with the expectations of both in such a beautiful way. And for me, that's where like it all clicks, I think, with drag. And it's a shame that some people can't appreciate that, but maybe they're just not aware of it. And I think the more you step outside of the Drag Race, the more you see that huge spectrum of these amazingly talented artists.
I think something that I think it was Virgin Extravaganza she put on her Instagram once, was she finds it kind of patronising when people say, oh, I'm going to go support this queer artist, or I'm going to go see this drag show to support queer art, when actually you should be going to see a drag show because you want to be entertained, or you want to go see a queer performance. You don't want to support them because that's kind of almost patronising. They're not a charity case. You're not a charity case. You're an artist or a drag performer. You're here to entertain or put on a show or whatever, but you're not there to be supported by people buying tickets.
It's true, and I think it creates this narrative of, oh, you go to see Drag Race queens to be entertained, but a lot of narratives say, oh, you should also support your queer artists. Like, they aren't at the exact same level. And I think that was what I was worried about when I heard that, you know, obviously UK Drag Race is coming to the UK, that it would create this divide of a fake notion of quality difference between queens who are on the show, UK queens that are on the show, and UK queens that aren't. Like, some of the most talented drag artists in the world, I'd say, haven't been on Drag Race and have been so successful. Like, if you think of, it's like, you know, Cheddar Gorgeous, Hungry, Imp, Vander Van Aan, Jodie Harsh, etc., like, they are all not only so artistically talented, but just so successful, both in the queer community and just in the mainstream media. And they haven't been on the show. Like, obviously, so many talented queens have come from the show, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're equal or more to. I think, it's a TV show, and it's a form of entertainment, but it doesn't denote a certain level of quality above any other queens, because I think it's just another set of skills you need to have being on a television show. But working with a live audience is probably the hardest thing you can do as an entertainer, especially when you work full-time, bringing something new every single night or every other night throughout the week. Yeah, like it's kind of the most talented thing you can do, really.
What does a performance by Stella actually look like?
Strange. I always say, like, if you're trying to, like, my references for a lot of my performances are, it's more like, I'm not a dancer, a trained dancer, or kind of a comedian per se. So my performances always kind of are referencing artists like Sacha Velour, Vander Von Odd, where they're kind of more theatrical. I usually am trying to tell a story or kind of a narrative of some sort. And sometimes it'll be that I find a song and I think, okay, I want to bring something around the song, or it'll be that I think of an idea or kind of a story that I want to tell. I'm like, okay, I want to create this arc. So I bring in a lot of different references. Like, I usually like to bring in kind of modern, like, songs, like pop songs, or kind of just mainstream media. And then I'll bring in, like, an old 50s instructional video or kind of a show tune from the 1930s, and bring it all together to kind of create this narrative that jumps to unexpected places. And I think people like it as well because it's a mix of something that's really familiar and then something that's unfamiliar as well. But I'm always trying to try something new with my performances. Like when I did Bushwig in New York in September, I did just one song, which for me was a bit of a stretch because I usually like to have different songs because I need to give myself something to do, if that makes sense. If I just have a lot of time where I'm left to my own devices in terms of movement, I get either nervous or I don't know what to do with my body. Not necessarily either have a prop, but just something like, okay, this is happening or this is the narrative. But I like that having one song because it kind of allowed me to kind of push myself and put more emotionally into it. And I had an outfit where it was a white dress, and I had kind of a tearaway tassel bit that then revealed this heart that I then pulled streamers out of because I did Elastic Heart by Sia. So that's how, like, even if it's not in the mix, there's always some kind of element, different kind of element, whether, it's like the prop or the outfit. Or I did a performance just last week at this thing called Utopia, which is a new night run by a friend of mine, Dan Burgess, and I realized, even though I've been performing now since I started doing drag, I never really used my masks in a lot of my performances, or they never played a big role, which seems kind of counterintuitive since I'm known for my masks. So I did Lord's Royals, and I had light cues throughout it where the light goes off and then I have a different mask on, which was fun to kind of bring that element because obviously a lot of the masks are ones I've worn before, so it was fun for people to see like the familiarity of, oh, I know that mask, or I know when you wore that, to kind of a song as well that's about being an outsider and creating your own fantasy. So yeah.
That's cool, almost like a wig reveal but with masks.
Exactly, yeah.
That is really cool.
Yeah, I try and kind of, because I like the idea of reveals, but at the same time I think they can be overused or if they don't have a purpose. Because after I did the Bushwick performance, a few months later I did the Shay Shay show, the return, not episode, but show. And I had a similar dress, but kind of the reverse. I was wearing a red tulle dress and I had a white heart on it. And funnily enough, it wasn't planned, but all of the performers, it was Mental Health Awareness Week. And we all ended up doing performances that were based around mental health. I think just by chance it was all in our mind, and I think it's such an important issue for queer people, and obviously for everyone, but I think especially, like, it's great that queer people are trying to talk more about it. And so I kind of did it was part spoken word and then part music, but at the very end I took scissors and I cut the heart open, and then I pulled notes out of it, which I just wrote phrases on it that were things I either had learned to tell myself or someone had told me, or I wished someone had told me when I used to, and sometimes still do, suffer really bad with panic attacks and anxiety. And so yeah, and then I just gave them out to the audience. It's kind of just little pieces of advice, you know, or something that you can take away from it. And I like that as well, being able to interact with the audience. I think every performer does, but I like finding new ways to do it that are kind of unexpected or different, because I think when you find that connection with an audience, that's when it's really satisfying as a performer. And it's nice because then they can kind of take something away from it, and you show them that, like, because I think drag, obviously, because we're wearing these elaborate outfits and we look very surreal, it does, and especially my outfits, because I obviously have that mask, it kind of others you and distances you from the audience. And I think it's nice to then break that barrier and do something that says, like, even though I'm dressed like this and even though I look like an alien, I am human. And having that kind of juxtaposition between the two, I think, is kind of a fun combination to play with.
Well, I just love this idea of the mask, and I wonder whether there's something about the panic attacks and the anxiety that mean that maybe you're more comfortable by wearing a mask. And I'm probably doing analysing this way too heavily, but I wonder whether that's also a coping mechanism on stage. I don't know. Is that part of it, or is it purely about kind of hiding something?
You know, I definitely think it's part of it. Not so much in terms of being on stage, because weirdly, on stages where I just feel very, very comfortable, because I've been, even before I did drag, I was in theater, you know, like most queer kids, I was very much in performance and art. But I think especially when I'm just out at parties and hosting, I think, like, even though I don't suffer from anxiety as much as I used to, but I think I still get a sense of social anxiety, whereas when you're in drag, you know, people want to talk to you, you know, you're constantly engaging with people all the time. And there's definitely this expectation of, if you're just a regular person and you're at a club, you don't need to treat every person like they're your best friend. Whereas that there's that expectation when you're a drag artist, which isn't a negative one. Like, I love the fact that people feel like they can come up to me and talk to me about what I do, or just express, you know, whether they like my outfit or just want to say hi. Like, I love that. But at the same time, you know, I get social anxiety, not extremely, but just like anyone else, like being greeted by that many people. So I think the masks make it nice to have a bit, like I said earlier, the ability to kind of step back from it and take a moment, and also to choose sometimes when it is too much, to choose who I engage with, or just choose, like, when I engage with people. Like, if I'm in a mask and I just want to stand in the corner for a little while and relax, people can't see my face, so there's that kind of moment of, they're like, okay, I'm not gonna approach them in the same way. Whereas if you could, I think it's just the fact of being able to see someone's face makes a huge difference. And I like that it makes it intimidating in a weird way, or that it kind of, it gives me a bit of choice, because I think as much as drag artists, like, we love to be able to engage with people, and we love that our appearance makes us a center of attention, I think it takes away the choice. And obviously we're choosing for it to take away that choice of interaction, but at the same time, like, it's nice to be able to kind of consciously step back from it and create a little bit of a boundary, so that I can then kind of just balance it for myself as well, in terms of, like, energy and just being able to be happy and present in the room, you know. And
I think maybe on the topic of masks, what is the story behind the mask over there in the corner? And then, like, obviously describe it as well.
That mask is has a kind of interesting story. It was one where I had the idea for it before I made it, because how I come about my mask is in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it'll be, I see kind of something that a designer has created, you know, and I'll be like, okay, I want to recreate that with my own twist. Because the thing is, I do give credit where credit is due. Some of my masks, I just are inspired by other people, you know, and I want to take it and do it in a new way, or I just want to recreate it because I can't afford to spend thousands to have it, but I would love to kind of do it and you know, and be able to have it in my own way. But that one, I've always been fascinated by bumblebees and bees in general. They've always really just fascinating creatures to me, inspired me, and I think their kind of iconography with hexagons and what they represent in terms of life is so interesting and so visually beautiful. And I like kind of the idea of an insect silhouette is kind of very severe and kind of creepy and othering, almost like other mother in Coraline when she becomes that like weird creature with like the scales. So I had the idea for it, like of this, not necessarily a mask, but just a headpiece that framed my face, but I didn't know how to do it. And then I work part-time at a pub, and we had these bits of plastic netting that go under the glasses behind the bar. And we were cutting new ones to replace them. And we had all these extra cuttings left over, and I saw it and I thought, that's perfect.
So just to describe it, it's kind of a black mesh made up of square rectangles that look like they've been glued or stuck together.
Yeah.
There's some kind of honey-coloured diamonds, diamante. And then what's the crowning feature on it?
The crowning feature is a collection of real taxidermied wasps and bees that kind of frame, that are stuck on it, different positions that frame my face.
They're very close to your mouth, your nose, your eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're kind of my little, like, companions. I really wanted to work with kind of real taxidermied insects because I think they're really beautiful, and I think it adds that element of kind of realism to it and kind of obviously shocks people because they're like, oh shit, they're real. Which I'm sorry for any vegans listening. I feel bad. But I do it because obviously I didn't kill them myself, and maybe they died of natural causes. I do it because in the long run I love bees and I want to help. Like I donate regularly to like a charity that helps support bees, and I like to obviously use in the long run to like make people think about and just notice these creatures in kind of a new way. And I wore it for a really fun shoot I did with a friend of mine, Davy Tyler, and I was wearing Carol Saigon's outfit, which was, I paired them together because it looks very kind of animalistic, and it creates this silhouette that's very angular and severe, because I wanted to kind of be this creature that is natural but also unnatural at the same time. I was happy it turned out well, because obviously I often have these ideas in my head, and then in executing them, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, and sometimes they work but they don't have the effect, like they're not as elaborate as I want them to be. But this one turned out really nicely.
So for you, is the art more important than the drag, or is the drag more important than the art? How does that sit together?
I think for me it's kind of, they're very much one and the same, because the art is the drag, you know, and they engage with each other all the time, because even though in one look, like this one with the bees, I'm just trying to look like a creature, and then in others I'm very much, you know, playing around with the idea of sexuality or femininity. For me it's always that idea of disrupting gender norms and playing around with expectations of like the female body, or just the body in general, and like what it can be and how you can describe it or redescribe it. So it's always, they're always a part of each other. And I think it's because for me the art is wearable. Like I have done visual art and I write as well. Like I have different forms, but for me in terms of the drag art that I do, it's always a part of Stella, and it always is a part of the expression. So I can't really separate them. You know, the mask is never kind of a standalone thing. It's always a part of greater outfit or a greater concept that is everything from just what I put on to also just the way I act or the way I wear an outfit.
And you were saying earlier with the outfit that it was a designer. Who was the designer that made it?
Carol Saigon.
Do you work with those designers to come up with concepts, or how does that come about? Or
I work with a lot of different designers, but it's usually I will see their work and realize that, you know, I love it, and then I'd like to wear it. And sometimes it'll be that I make a mask and then I see the look and I think those would work really well together. Other times it's that I know the designer, I know their work, and I think, okay, I want to make a mask to go with that outfit. And that's probably one of the things I love most about drag, which I've tried to do more and more, is collaborating with designers and photographers to create like looks and concepts that are just really immersive and really interesting. And for me it's such a great process, and it's also a great way to just build relationships with people. And I also like it that I can not only work with these designers and photographers, but also it's an exchange. Like we all promote each other's work and we all get to kind of gain something creatively from it. And it also pushes me to always be creating new looks, because sometimes the looks I create for a club, they fit specifically within a club setting, or I'll have looks that I just kind of throw together last minute. But then looks that I make for shoots, I'll really put extra effort into them because I'll try and make them. It's obviously in a camera, every little detail is there. So it pushes me. I have to pay such an attention to detail that I might not always in a club. Because in a club, obviously people are drunk and your mask has to be durable. Whereas like that bee mask, I can never wear that to anything but a shoot because it is so fragile and I don't want anyone pulling off a wing or, you know, I can't move my head the wrong way or else it might not, you know, stay together. So once I'd love to get to the point where I could work with designers to make custom outfits for the looks that I do. Because for me, like, I often will make the mask and then just pull, you know, outfits that I have because I don't sew. And even though I'd like to sew, for me, my masks take up so much time that I really focus all of my time and energy into those because those are the focal piece. And then I'll just find bits of my wardrobe, drag wardrobe, that fit to go with it. But I'd love to get to a point where everything from head to toe is all one cohesive, like made for that look. Like with the B one, if I'd say had the time to have a custom outfit, it would have, you know, shoulder pads and all sorts of like, all of me would be an insect, which obviously I was able to do with Carol Sagan's outfit, but I can also think in my head all the other ways I would try and do that. So that's where where I'm like moving towards, is just because obviously I'm always Stella, but I think I can always get further in that journey of like becoming more and more this like the idea I have in my head of like the peak Stella Marbles that I can be, you know. So in my mind I'm in like the baby steps of getting there, you know, whereas when I hope to be there, I look at people like, you know, Sasha Velour or Imp Queen or Cheddar Gorgeous Anaphylactic, where it's like every little, there's not one attention to detail that isn't there. Like all of it is just complete. And yes, that's what I aspire to.
We've asked everyone so far. Obviously this year is a really important year for queer rights, being 50 years since Stonewall. And we've spoken, you know, to previous guests about how that was a catalyst, maybe not the start of the queer movement, but kind of a big moment in it. So we've had 50 years of change since then. What do you hope for queer culture in the next 50 years?
I hope that it's just more and more acceptance. And I think also that we rely less and less on certain boundaries and labels. Like, I understand and completely respect that for a lot of people, having those labels and being able to proudly identify with them is so important. You know, whether you're a trans woman or a trans man or non-binary. And I think right now they're really necessary. Because that's where we are in kind of this journey of getting non-queer people to accept us and also just accepting each other. Like, there's still a lot of division in the queer community, even though we wish there wasn't. But I'd love to look in 50 years from now and just see that it's just, there's no different terms. It's just one family, you know, one big queer community that regardless of your sexual preference or regardless of how you identify, it's all inclusive and you don't need to state, you know, who you are. You can, but there's not that need to. And I think also kind of a redefining or just opening of what queerness can be. Because obviously when we usually say queerness, it's sexual preference and obviously gender identity. But for me, queerness can also be, I think that you can be someone who is, say, straight and still be very much a queer individual or a part of the queer community. Like, I know some of the most talented drag artists I know identify as straight, you know, or they mostly have partners of the opposite sex. And I think queerness, along with being a sexual preference or a form of identity, is also just about how you engage with yourself and how you engage with the world and art and body and how you look at what it means to be a person. Because I think a lot of queerness is just about defying expectations and being willing to reevaluate yourself and accept that you can change, you know, that your identity can change or the way you think can change and the way you dress can change, and accepting that fluidity just in what it means to be a person. So I hope everyone's queer. I think queerness is just, it's just a state of being that I think everyone can embrace more in the world. And yeah, just that we can all kind of find more acceptance and less of a need to use labels to kind of not necessarily force acceptance, but use labels to make it feel safe.
I love that idea that queerness should evolve from being this sexuality or this gender thing and move across to this state of mind rather than this, labels thing. Because I think for me, I'm sat here as a gay white cis man, but actually queer feels more interesting and feels like a better state of being than just defining myself by the labels. Queer has that kind of openness and that, as you're talking about, that ability to look outside of where you are and maybe be uncomfortable and push boundaries, and it's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one thing I leaned towards more and more when I got into drag, because I was, in terms of like how I identified myself, I knew, like, for example, like in terms of my sexuality, like I knew I was attracted to women as well as men from probably the age of like 16, 17, but then I was into very long-term relationships with men, and then I went back to, oh, well, maybe I'm just straight again. Then went back to being single and realized, no, I'm still very much, and always have been, attracted to both men and women. And so then I was like, okay, well, I'm bisexual. And then I started getting more into the queer community, into drag. And then I realized that it wasn't just about men or women, but I'm also just attracted to queer individuals, people that, are non-binary, or just simply men or women who explore their gender and express femininity or express masculinity in different ways. And that was when I kind of discovered like the term pansexual, etc., etc. But then I thought, if I add more and more labels to myself, it just feels like it's another thing to explain, like, or another thing to like cut myself into. And obviously pansexual is still kind of a new term that not everyone knows about or is aware of. And I was like, I don't know, one, it shouldn't be anyone's business anyway, but even if I do want to talk about it, it still kind of creates this like umbrella. Whereas when people ask me, I just say I'm queer because that encompasses my sexuality, it encompasses my gender, it just encompasses who I am. So for me, that's how I feel most comfortable existing. And usually when I talk about the LGBT plus community, I just say the queer community, because for me it just encompasses everything. And like I said, it just encompasses not only people who are queer because of their sexuality or their gender preference, but also just people who are queer because they exist in this community and they have that frame of mind regardless of sexuality or preference. Yeah, so that's just kind of how I look at it nowadays. But then I also think there's no wrong or right way to do it. Like, if you want to use those labels, and if that's where you feel comfortable existing, and if it gives you a sense of pride, then you should, because whatever makes you feel comfortable is really the best thing to go for.
And I think that's really interesting as well, because I think we've spoken about this, I'm looking at Darren, about the term LGBT plus and about LGBTQ plus and about LGBTQIA plus. And that acronym just keeps expanding because people want to be held back by labels and to define themselves and almost
a sense of community.
Validify themselves. Yeah. And so it's interesting because I've also spoken to gay men who have a massive problem with the term queer. And so there is this really interesting kind of disjointedness to the two acronyms, the LGBTQ plus acronym and the queer way of defining our society.
But I do think we're kind of in this like a space where it's slowly starting to grow, that the idea of an LGBT plus community and the queer community are almost slightly separating. When you talk about the queer community, you're talking about a slightly different community than when you're talking about the LGBT plus community. I feel like there's that kind of vibe that like you're saying, people who identify as queer and understand like the queer ideology kind of thing, it is a different kind of almost mindset, a different kind of space you're in than when you're talking about the LGBT plus community. It is like the queer communities are about people who do kind of define more ambiguity and kind of don't look at labels the same way as the LGBT plus community, where it is still fixated on those labels for community, for how do you say that word?
Validification?
Yeah.
I'm making up words.
Yeah, we all are here. But I feel like that's kind of much like a vibe that's kind of starting to happen. And I don't know if that's just me seeing that, but...
No, I definitely think that's true. It's like I was saying, like, queerness, it's like you can say some people might look at it as queer, being queer is about that, the kind of state of mind, whereas people who say, and then obviously this is like a generalization, I'm sure there are people who aren't look at it this way, there are people who very much want to say LGBT is just more about, it's just purely their sexual preference or purely their gender, and that's just, like, I sometimes jokingly say that there's people who are, gay or lesbian, etc., and that's just their sexual preference, but the rest of their life is not being a queer person. Like, that's just who they have relationships with, that's just who they date and who do they go to bed with at night, but the rest of their life is, queerness isn't a part of their everyday identity. Whereas I think people who sometimes people can say people who identify as queer, it is their part of their identity. It's their, it's their everyday life. It's their expression. And obviously if people want to look at it that way, I think that's everyone's right to, but at the same time, not everyone should need to. If you're just someone who's gay or someone who's lesbian, etc., that's who you sleep with, but you don't want that to be, you're not going to be going to drag shows. You're not going to go to Pride, just because that's not what you want to do, then that's perfectly okay. Like, everyone's choice, to engage with, their community how they want to. But at the same time, I think rejecting, like, the need to reject that ambiguity. It's one thing if you say, like, oh, I'm not into that, but that's fine. But people who I think who actively don't want to be associated with the idea of queerness, or who actively reject that ambiguity, I think there's maybe a sense of insecurity or fear with kind of being looked at as either not male or not gay. It's people who kind of dislike the idea of bisexuality or pansexuality because it's a rejection of labels, and it's an idea that who you like or who you are can be not fixed, and that it can change. And I think that scares some people. And, that's a journey that everyone has to go through individually. But I think that by rejecting it, I think you put the whole community back a little bit, because I think then you're saying that there's maybe something wrong with those people, or that you don't want to be associated with those people because they represent something that's wrong or something that's just not quite right. Yeah, so it's political for a lot of people. We do need to address, because saying even if you don't actively identify as queer, if someone comes up to you and says, you're a queer individual, it shouldn't necessarily be associated with shame. But I think it's hard as well because everyone comes from different backgrounds, because some people still look at queer as a derogatory term. And even though now it's been reclaimed as a term of pride, not everyone's there. Some people still look at it with that kind of history of shame, and it's going to take us time to unpack that.
So, you didn't say it when we started recording the podcast, but why do you have a Bible?
Oh, so I have a Holy Bible because I did a show a few months ago with this queen called Lady Area Gray, and it's called Red for Filth. And I think there was either another one coming up or just happened recently. And it was basically drag artists reading books or reading excerpts from books. And it was the first one, so it was the first chapter. And I was thinking about first chapters, and obviously as a student of literature, I have such a wide range of references that were running through my mind. And I thought, well, what's kind of a more iconic first chapter than the Holy Bible? And for me, I've always been I didn't do Bible studies as kind of an avenue when I was studying literature, but I always thought, I've always been fascinated by fairy tales and mythology and kind of the religious history of the Bible and how it was created and put together, and how I basically, before I read it, I did this preamble talking about what I'd learned when I did do some Bible studies in university. And I say Bible studies and looking at it from a historical perspective of how it wasn't something that was just created at once, but it was rewritten and re-scribed over years and years by many, many different people. And it was pulling together, the first and the second chapter of the Bible weren't written in chronological order. There were two different interpretations of the beginning of man. And so I basically rewrote the first chapter with my own kind of alterations of how I would have want it to be read, or what I would want to take from it, because that's what was done with the Bible. And I think especially now when we look at parts of the world, even America, where religion and the Bible in particular is used as a form to incite violence, those churches have changed it. They changed it to justify slavery. They changed it to justify various different things. Why can't, to justify anti-LGBTQ rhetorics. It's why can't we change it to be pro-queerness and pro-acceptance? Because that is the history of it. It's an ever-changing text. And I'm not a religious person, but I think religion is very powerful. And so I just really wanted to explore that a little bit.
I also love how you have defaced the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was also, what I wanted to do is, just because it's paper,
But this is a journey that religion has to go on. It has to develop, and it has to understand
Exactly.
contemporary issues. And so it has to be rewritten.
Mm-hmm. And you are seeing that, some churches not just Christian churches, but other churches are accepting LGBTQ people and changing their rhetoric. And it's something that, we think that the way religion is now, just the way we think that the way LGBTQ acceptance is now, is very static. But you look at history, and just because it takes a few hundred years or takes decades, it is always changing and vastly differentiating. And yeah, I just thought it would be interesting to bring something as traditional and as often seen as anti-queer as the Bible into a very queer setting and kind of just put a spotlight on it, which no one expected, which I always enjoy.
Would you read it?
Sure. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created humankind in their own image. In the image of God, they created them. And God said, "Be fruitful and know that you are loved. Embrace each other and feel no shame for who you are, my children. Spread light and love to each of your kind, for you are all created equal, and fear not to be courageous, and love freely and chart your own fate upon this earth, and enable the facets of your being, so long it not be in the name of fear or hatred. Embrace those who are different than you and those who are downtrodden. Love your bodies and know that the journey you take with them is yours to choose. Treat this earth and its creatures with respect. Care for their gifts kindly, and it will care for you in return. I am you, and you are me. I am the stars and the green in your eyes and the whispers in the wind, and you are these things too. You make me what I am, and that is ever-changing. I am the mirror of all souls. Break through the firmament and speak to me, for I am listening. I give you this. And it was so. God saw all that they had made, and it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in their vast array.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. If you aren't religious, I don't think you'd even notice that you've rewritten it.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to do, because I wanted to show how it's just little things that can make such a huge difference in how you think about religion, but also just how you think about acceptance. Like, I wanted to write it so that someone could pick this up in 100 years, and that would be the Bible. Talking about, obviously the Bible does talk about acceptance, but talking about it in a different way, talking about the human body as something that can change and that can be accepted. And that's why most of it, the first chapter, I left the same, because I wanted people to try and figure out where I changed it. Even just things like changing the pronouns to they instead of he, or mankind to humankind. Just like little things like that. Obviously, if someone did that in the Bible, it would completely change the way that people look at religion.
I was actually about to ask, is it written in there that the Bible, that they use they for like God and stuff, and actually
No,
they changed it?
It's his.
Yeah.
I didn't even know
it's
that.
he.
As someone who's not religious, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting us into your house.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for making me tea.
Of course. Thank you for letting me say words on your podcast.
So that's the end of this episode with the amazing Stella Marbles. I think that episode was so educational and so inspiring. I think there's so much more research I want to go into and now look into, like the club kid scene and the drag artistry scene and just everything. It was incredible.
And a really lovely person to talk to. Really interesting points of view about the queer community.
It was like, she's so intelligent. It's incredible for someone who is as young as Stella is. Just amazing. Yeah.
And just a final plug, if you are around on the 21st of April and you would like to support the Kaleidoscope Trust, then do go to Stella's ball. We'll link somewhere with tickets.
Yeah. It looks like it's going to be an incredible master ball. Yeah, so that's it for this week's episode. We'll be back again sometime soon with another episode. Don't forget to like and share this one.
And if you want to join us and come and let us into your living room and make me cups of tea, then do get in touch. But apart from that, see you on the flip side.
Good God.